journalism, literature and creative communication arts. He was given the award for his passionate commitment as a journalist to restore the rural poor to India's national consciousness. In a 30-year career as a journalist, Mr. Sainath has won close to 40 global and national awards for his reporting, though he has turned on several, including one of India's highest civilian awards. Mr. Sainath's book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, has remained a non-fiction bestseller by an Indian author for years. His current work involves a series on devastation of Indian agriculture by anti-farmer policies this past decade, which runs in the Hindu, consisting of detailed reports from the household of landless laborers and marginal farmers across the country. He has published over 150 investigative reports on the agrarian crisis in the Hindu alone. Mr. Sainath has spent an average of 270 days a year in the poorest villages of India since 1993. Inspired by his work, Canadian documentary maker Joe Moulins has produced a documentary entitled A Tribe of His Own, The Journalism of P. Sainath. Till date, it has won 14 international awards, including the top ones at Columbia and Global Visions Film Festival. I now request Mr. Sainath to please deliver his lecture.
Thank you very much. We have this topic of inequality before us. Briefly, the fastest growing sector in India today and for the last 10 years or whatever is not IT, not software. The fastest growing thing in this country for the last 15 years is inequality. By every measurable indicator, it has grown faster in the last 15 years than at any period in the preceding 50 years of your country's independent history. Well, it's actually pretty nice to, it's quite an interesting situation towards the end of the last year when the issue of inequality and starts disturbing Mr. Ratan Tata. I found that very interesting and entertaining. Mr. Tata is very worried that what's happening in our country is going to make us a banana republic, I'm quoting verbatim, where people of lesser power go to jail and bodies are found in the trunks of cars. A very grisly thought, especially if you're a car manufacturer. Like Mr. Tata is. And I suppose, well, nothing pisses off a customer more than a body in the trunk, right? So I suppose it's an even worse thought if you are the manufacturer of Jaguar Land Rover. Nice roomy trunks. 2 bodies for the price of 1. Right. Anyway, let's assume that, Prakash will correct me if I'm wrong, you've blocked this hall, before the audience comes for some time already. So let's assume you've taken this hall for, say, 3 hours from the evening? 2, 3. Pretty good. But I'm not going to revise my math for you because I've calculated it on the basis of 3 hours. You can make the adjustments. What happens in 3 hours in your country? Any 3 hours, not just the 3 hours that you and I are having a discussion over here. Any 3 hours in this country, 6 farmers will have committed suicide. 40 to 55 will have attempted it. 274 farmers will have quit agriculture altogether. 257 children in your country will have died of malnutrition in that time, and hundreds more will have entered grade 3 and grade 4 malnutrition. All the figures are official, the Government of India figures. But there's another thing that will happen in those 3 hours. In those 3 hours, when 6 guys commit suicide, 50 or so attempt it, 257 children die of malnutrition. In those same 3 hours, the Government of India will write off 171 crore rupees in taxes for the richest people in this country, for the corporate world and for the high net worth individuals in your society. Do you want me to tell you how and where you can check this number? Yeah. Get onto your union budget. It's online. There's a section in the union budget called Statement of Revenue Foregone. Do you understand that? it means, okay guys, this is what we are writing off for you this time. Right? Statement of revenue foregone has 12 tables. It's one of the first annexures of the budget. One of the last chapters of the budget. Statement of revenue foregone. What it tells you is, if under a particular head of tax, you are supposed to collect so much, you're supposed to collect 100, the government says we are writing off 80. So 80% of that particular tax is written off. Let's take only 3 because there are hundreds of taxes, okay? But let's just take 3 major taxes. 1, direct corporate income tax. Any guesses on how much is written off in the current budget? 80,000 crores. That's for a handful of people. That's for a handful of people, okay? It's not for a giant body of human beings. 80,000 crores is the direct corporate income tax write-off. Second, the customs write-off is in the region of 149,000 crores, and the excise duty write-off. All these are mainly availed off by the better off sections of society. You want to break that up, I can do it for you. 279,000 crores is the excise duty write-off. The customs duty, or rather the other way around, customs duty write-off is 279,000 crores, and 149,000 crores is the excise write-off. You know how much that adds up to? 500,000 crores. 492 or 494,000 crores, these 3 heads. You know how much that works out to? It works out to 57 crores per hour or 1 crore per minute approximately. The same government does not have money for a universal public distribution system. It does not have money to go from 25 kgs to 35 kgs per family for food entitlements. Tamil Nadu is a very exceptional state, as are 2 or 3 other states. But for all those programs, there's no money. As you know, the Prime Minister himself turned down an NAC request for increasing entitlements under the PDS. In fact, he turned down a letter which came from his boss. Right? So they don't have money for that. But 80,000 crores. Now, incidentally, the budget itself makes the observation very clearly that this is a very disturbing trend. It says it needs to be reversed. And the table then shows you that it has actually increased every year. You can't write off more than 80%. They have. It's 80% is the write-off. My friends, these are not the subsidies. You want to get into the subsidies, then we need all night. Okay? We're just talking about write-offs under 3 heads. This does not include land and water subsidies. It does not include physically acquired land from poor farmers, which is then handed out at throwaway rates to the super rich of this country. This does not include the SCZ subsidies. It does not include water and electricity subsidies given to large corporations. It does not, for instance, include the subsidies given to the IPL. Are you aware that there are substantial public subsidies to the IPL whose team owners include 4 people on the Forbes Billionaires list? Are you aware of this? Who are those 4 billionaires who are Forbes billionaires who are the IPL owners? Vijay Mallya, Mukesh Ambani, GMR Rao, and KP Singh, DLF. He's the title sponsor. These 4 guys own IPL teams for which you are paying. Okay, who is the sponsor of Mukesh Ambani's Mumbai Indians? New India Assurance, public sector company. Why the heck should the public sector be paying for Mukesh Ambani's investments in cricket? Right. They got tax write-offs from the government of Maharashtra for educational purposes. You know, yeah, because cheerleaders were a new element in Indian education. So, yeah, well, we never had that in our education. Come, okay, so let's be fair. So these are the write-offs under just 3 heads: in direct corporate income tax, excise duty, and customs duty. 57 crores a minute. So in our 3 hours, we are talking about a write-off of 171 crores in the 3 hours that you have the hall, or Prakash would probably make it 150 crores because he took it only for 2.5 hours. Yeah. By the way, that 500,000 crores write-off in the union budget, the 80,000 crores in direct income tax write-off last year was 68,000 crores. So you can see the percentage rate at which it's grown. They've very helpfully given you a table so that you don't have to trouble yourself too much. Tables 5 to 12. That's the list of tables that you need to look at in the statement for revenue foregone. 500,000 crores write-off is 2.5 times your 2G scam. Except that this scam is written into your budget. So it's 2.5 times your scam, 2G scam, or if you are couple Sybil, it's 500,000 times, crore times bigger than the scam, because there were no losses in the 2G scam. Now, but anyway, I guess things are looking up. If you notice, it's been 100 hours, 4 days have passed without a single new scam of over 100,000 crores popping up. So I guess things are looking up. Incidentally, what does the government plan for? Then you also have another form of looting of the Indian exchequer. How many of you have looked at the Global Financial Integrity Report on illicit fund transfers? Many newspapers have not covered it. They've chosen not to cover it. They have mentioned it. The Hindu and Business Line did cover it extensively. I wrote the story in the Hindu. You're losing 240 crores a day in money taken out by the same guys who get all these subsidies, by the same guys who get these write-offs. Global Financial Integrity is a Washington think tank that is not by any stretch of imagination a radical outfit. They are good, strong advocates of the market, etc., but they are worried about the illicit finances leaving countries and going into Swiss banks. Their calculations do not include smuggling, narcotics, and all those other pleasant side activities that we have. Okay, they just are talking about rich people and companies taking money, evading tax, and parking it in Swiss banks and Cayman Islands and Bermuda and Man of Isle and Liechtenstein and Luxembourg and a couple of other places that no one can pronounce. So then, how much money has left India in this form? According to Global Financial Integrity, $462 billion. Actually, on the way here, as Prakash will tell you, that's what I was calculating on the calculator to figure out how many bloody zeros that is that in rupees. It is actually the $462 billion that have been looted by your country's super rich is equal to 21 lakh crores. 21, that's 10 or 12 times the size of your 2G scam, right? 10 to 12 times the size. Okay, but even more interesting, this is independent India's history of scamming in the illicit funds. But how much of this money has gone out in the period of liberalization? Half, more than half has gone out in the last 20 years. How much of it has gone out in the last 8 years from 2000 to 2008? Because the report stops at 2008. In those 8 years, $125 billion, which is 5,60,000 crores, 3 times the size of your 2G scam, has gone out by the very people to whom you are also giving those concessions in the statement of revenue foregone. The Global Financial Integrity Report says absolutely categorically, they call it, they use cute language for who's responsible. They call it the drivers of illicit flows, which means the bandits. It's a polite term saying the drivers of illicit flows. And it says very categorically, 1, corporations, 2, high net worth individuals. These are the 2 categories, it says, who take the money out and park it abroad. Now, what is the government of India planning to do for this? Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who has announced the 96th group of ministers. There are actually now far more groups of ministers than there are ministers. Okay? We have one to study the APL entitlements. Another group is studying how to raise the price of APL food grain. A third group is studying how to raise the prices of diesel. A fourth group is studying how to mitigate the effect of the rise of food grain prices. And the guy in charge of the food grain is your minister, who in Vidarbha, where I've come from, is not called the Krishi Mantri, he's called the Cricket Mantri. And, well, let's be fair on him. I mean, APL, BPL, IPL, what's the difference, right? So if you look at this, these are the write-offs. These are the write-offs for each of these guys. By the way, many of the companies benefiting from the write-offs and many of the individuals whose names are now showing up in those accounts are the same guys who have shown up in the LIC loans for bribe scam, DB Realty, the same bunch of people. Because the actual number of companies and people involved, rich people, is actually quite small. It's a very compact group. So you have this tremendous, absolutely incredible looting going on. at the rate of 240 crores a day, it's much more, that's the average for 50 years. It's much more intense in the last 8 years, right? And the same, and in terms of write-offs from non-repayment of loans, on average over the last 20 years, it's been between 40 to 50,000 crores. When a rich man owes money and doesn't pay it, you don't call it a bad debt. You call it a non-performing asset. It's an asset. You call it, it's a non-performing asset. Today it isn't working for you. Someday it will, when it takes the economy down totally. The last month or so, I've spent a lot of time in Marathwada, which is a part of Maharashtra, and Vidarbha, also a region in Maharashtra. Marathwada is where all the chief ministers of Maharashtra generally come from, except with the exception of Mr. Pawar when he was CM. But a lot of them come from Marathwada. Now here you have all these giant write-offs for all these big guys so that they can take their money and park it in Switzerland or whichever other place they're going to. I'm sure most of you in this room have either seen on television or read in your newspaper that in October, Mercedes-Benz made its single biggest sale ever in this country when a group of businessmen in Aurangabad, best known for Ajanta Ellora and not for Mercedes-Benz, and with a per capita income, annual per capita income of around 30,000 rupees, Aurangabad's businessmen bought 150 Mercedes-Benz at one shot. You saw that? You read about it? You heard about it? So none of you is unfamiliar with that. But how many of you know where the money came from? The deal was worth 63 crores. Who paid for it? The loan, 44 crores loan, came from the public sector, State Bank of India, at what rate of interest? 7%. What are your housing loans now? Okay, what is the farmer's loan? 7% interest, and the same 7% interest deal is now being worked out for another group of businessmen in Kolhapur who are trying to outdo these guys. They've reached 100 BMWs so far. But both loans are coming from the State Bank of India, a public sector. I am absolutely confident that many of these businessmen are never going to repay that loan. They are politically powerful. It will be written off as a non-performing asset. Though the Benz performs very well for them, but they're not going to pay. The same State Bank of India that charges you 7% interest on the Mercedes-Benz, on a loan to buy a Mercedes-Benz, charges a farmer 12.75% for a tractor loan that is much less than the Mercedes-Benz. 12.75% on a tractor loan is what you will pay if you take 4 lakhs. If you take 5 lakhs, it goes up to 13.2%. You go up to 6 lakhs, it's 14%. So you're paying 7% if you buy a non-productive Mercedes-Benz, and which you're going to default on for sure. And you pay up to 14% to buy a tractor. Welcome to India 2011. That is the state of your inequality. And one of the things that after this, in the same Marathwada, I visited the house of we will come back to Marathwada in a bit. In the neighboring region of Vidarbha, I visited the house of Hargobind Harane, a paddy grower. It's very, very rare that paddy growers commit suicide. Very rare, because overwhelmingly the farmers' suicides in your country are those of cash crop farmers, because their risks are much higher. One of the biggest policy decisions. The inequality in your country is different from earlier inequality. You know, one can say, well, there was always inequality in India, right? Right, sure. The difference between the inequality of the last 20 years and the inequality of the preceding 45 years is that never has inequality been so cynically constructed, so ruthlessly engineered by design with theories of trickle down and other ideological justifications. It is the inequality in your society today is policy driven, as you can see in the tractor versus Mercedes-Benz. In the tractor versus Mercedes-Benz example, it is policy driven. It's a decision somebody has taken and imposed on society. Anyway, I went to the house of Hargobind Harane, who was refused bank loans and was selling his paddy crop, which has an MSP, a minimum support price of 1,000. he was selling it to the trader for 825 rupees. That is, he was losing 175 rupees on every quintal of paddy that he was selling, though there's a Government of India procurement order for 1,000. Why didn't he sell it? Government of India announces the procurement rate and then does not procure. It says the godowns are full. Why are the godowns full when people are hungry? Good question. But you know that debate. I won't go into it now. However, Hargobind Harane was finally so broke that when he decided to commit suicide, he went to the Kade, the Krishi Kendra, bought pesticide on credit and swallowed that. Educated farmer, MA Marathi. Marathi is the most difficult MA in Maharashtra. It's like MA Tamil is a very difficult MA to do. It's a high quality degree in Tamil Nadu. MA Marathi, wife is a 10th standard pass. Very highly educated for a farm girl. Right? No loans for Hargobind Harane. He wasn't, unfortunately, he didn't have the brains to buy a Mercedes Benz. Right? So that's what, he just took his pesticide and died. 3 districts down in Amravati, I went to the house of Marutrao Doke, whose wife committed suicide. She was the head of the household. She was the working farm household head. Incidentally, to those of you who don't know it, 19% of all rural households are women headed in this country. But when they commit suicide, we don't count it as a farmer's suicide. Because how can a woman be a farmer? A woman is a farmer's wife. Because in your country, women don't have properly recognized property rights. Their names are not on the patta. I've had this argument with 1,000 tehsildars. Why have you not included her as a farm suicide? She's not a farmer, sir. Show me the patta. Where is her name on the patta? She's not. So thousands of farm suicides of women don't get counted because they're not counted as farmers. They're counted as suicides, but not as farmers' suicides. Got it? So Marutrao Doke's wife, he is infirm, he's had tuberculosis. She ran the farm, she committed suicide. The last thing she did before committing suicide was to try raising money for the second attempt at the crop after the excess rains, which destroyed a lot of crop. So she pawned her Mangal Sutra. The proceeds of the pawning of the Mangal Sutra also paid for her funeral rites. After that, the whole village, the neighbors, everybody put money together and got the Mangal Sutra back from the moneylender. The money from the Mangal Sutra pawning paid for her 13th day ritual observance of her death. These people can't get loans. Now when I'm saying they can't get loans, there's an obvious contradiction, isn't it? The contradiction is that Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, before him Mr. Chidambaram, and before Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, all of them have told you that we have doubled rural credit, we have tripled rural credit. Oh yes, they have. They only give you absolute numbers. On an economy growing 9%, the doubling of the rural credit is actually a negative growth. You see, if I am giving out 10 rupees and I give out 20 rupees, it is not a huge increase in the rural credit, but more, what is it in percentage? Do you know what is rural India's share of total loans and advances of all scheduled commercial banks in this country? What is the percentage of people in rural India according to the census? 72%. What is the percentage of all loans and advances to rural India? And that includes the rural rich, okay? It's not as if, that's not to poor people, that's to rural India. What would you take a shot at guessing the percentage? 7.93%. Where you get the data from the quarterly journal of the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India. Right? 7.93%. Most of which again is cornered. So what we did is, Professor R. Ramakumar of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences looked at where the agricultural credit goes. Now we're not talking about rural credit, we're talking about agricultural credit. Who gets the agricultural credit? We found that it goes to poor, struggling farmers like Mukesh Ambani. Well, you see, Bombay has a different kind of farming. It's not contract farming, it's farming off contracts. Right. But what did we find? We took the data for, Professor Ramakumar took the data for India 2000 to 2008, and Professor Pallavi Chavan, who's actually working with the Reserve Bank of India, took the data for Maharashtra to find out where agricultural credit goes. The first thing will tell you where it goes. 2000 to 2008, you look at it, when you look at agricultural credit, you look at the size of the loan. From the size of the loan, you get an indicator of who's taking it. Okay. Now, Mr. Ambani is very unlikely to take a loan of less than 25,000 rupees. I hope you'll agree. What are the loans that increased and what are the loans that decreased in those 6 to 8 years from 2000? Loans below 25,000. Who takes loans below 25,000? Small and marginal farmers. Because you take, suppose you're a cotton farmer in Vidarbha today, you get 5,000 rupees per acre as your crop loan. So small and marginal farmers take loans of under 25,000 rupees. The number of loans of less than 25,000 rupees collapsed to less than half what they were in 2000. So that means small farmers are getting fewer and, am I confusing you? Do you understand that small farmers are then getting fewer and fewer and fewer loans because the number of loans of less than 25,000 rupees has collapsed? Anyone wanting to guess which size of loans shot up and doubled? Shot up massively. Maybe in some cases more than double, but shot up. Loans of over 10 crores and loans of over 25 crores went up massively. I don't know which of you have last met a poor and marginal peasant taking a loan of 25 crores, but I can't seem to remember one in 17 years of working full-time in the countryside. So even within the money that goes for agricultural credit, it's been siphoned towards, why? Because around in the mid-90s, a huge policy shift was made when we redefined priority sector lending and brought in institutional players. Today, rural credit goes to ICICI, goes to Reliance, goes to Monsanto, goes to Cargill through their front companies, goes to Monsanto through Mexico. So giant institutional players are getting what was designed originally for small and marginal farmers, which is what made the Green Revolution, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So you have loans of over 10 crores and 25 crores increasing. So it means that even that pathetic share for the farmer is being eaten by the big guys. That is really what has happened. Let me tell you what the law is now. What is the law, or what is the reworded law, or it's in the union budget. Please read the speech of Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. It shows you that if today, if say Vijay Mallya opens a cold storage in Bengaluru in MG Road, he gets agricultural credit at 6% to 7%. He gets agricultural credit. Why does he get agricultural credit? Cold storage, man. You keep vegetables in cold storage. The guy who grows the vegetables commits suicide. He doesn't get loans. But Vijay Mallya will get it if he opens that cold storage in Bengaluru, because that's connected to agriculture. The budget of 2010, if you read the finance minister's speech, it says categorically excise and customs exemptions for air-conditioned and refrigerated vehicles, which is what is used for transportation of produce by super retail size people, okay? Not by small farmers. They don't have AC bullock carts yet. Right? So this is where your agricultural credit money is going. But we'll come back to that too in a bit. What you're looking at is the most incredible inequality of our times that this country has ever known as an independent nation. After 20 years, and it's policy driven, because if you look at it, if you look at 1991 or look at even 1999, 2000, there is no dollar billionaire in your country. Today, you are 4th or 5th in the list of nations in dollar billionaires. By the way, my favorite website, permanently bookmarked, is ForbesBillionaires.com. That's a page, I keep watching it thinking one day. Right. So ForbesBillionaires.com is a page in Forbes.com. Right. You can see the stupendous march of India shining through each year. Incidentally, there was a sudden depopulation of billionaires. We lost half of them, alas, in the 2008 meltdown. But because of your stimulus packages worth 10 lakh crores, they are back and they've increased the number that they had in 2008 by a couple. Okay? Now you have 53 of them. You are 5th in the world now because China has suddenly muscled in. They always spoil our party, right? So, but who are the first? First is, of course, the obnoxious number of billionaires in the United States. Second is Russia and Germany, and then us. I'm not going to take note of China. We're not, we're not bothered about China. We're competing with the West. Though we are fourth in the number of billionaires, we are actually second in the net asset worth of our billionaires. Meaning our billionaires are worth a hell of a lot more. Our 53 billionaires are worth a hell of a lot more than Russia's 84 billionaires. And then you see there is the obvious moral superiority we have over the Russians. Their billionaires go to prison after 10 years. After 10 years, we send our billionaires to parliament. Let's leave aside all these petty would-bes and wannabes and concentrate on the main chance, which is the United States. Now here is something. Every year that our number of billionaires, dollar billionaires rose, every year that our number of dollar billionaires rose, our ranking in human development fell. The last human development report of the old index, what was called the Human Development Index, was 2009. In a year when we ranked fourth in the number of billionaires in the world, we ranked 134 in human development out of 177 nations. Do you know who all are ahead of you in the Human Development Index? Every single Latin American country there is ahead of India, including Bolivia, which many see as the poorest of Latin American nations. Quite a few African nations, my friend, are ahead of you. Okay? Botswana is ahead of you in human development. By the way, all your neighbors are mostly ahead of you, except on one or two indicators. Sri Lanka is 20 positions ahead of you. Vietnam, 30 positions ahead of you. Cuba, 80 positions ahead of you. Not a neighbor, but just to give you an idea of how others have done. Now, these 133 nations that are above you include 100 nations that you and I would sneer at as not being in the jet set of nations. Right? Now, how is it? What's very interesting and what you really need to think about, this is one of my central points to you, what you really need to think about is, these 100 nations that have done better than us, not one of them had 9% growth. Not one of them. Did Bolivia have 9% growth? Did Ecuador have 9% growth? Did Peru have 9% growth? Some of them may have had spectacular processes of growth for 1 year or 2 years. You had 8% for a decade. None of them has had that sustained. Okay, none of them is a software power. None of them is an IT superpower, with the exception possibly of Brazil. No one of these nations is the fourth largest military on earth. No one of them is a newly made military power, nuclear power. You have all those, but they have provided better lives to their citizens than you have. Isn't that something we need to think about? Nations which have 3% and 4% growth, nations which do not have nuclear power or military power, nations that do not have, they certainly do not have the gene pool of human resources that this nation has. You have everything going for you. The question is not how many bloody points you've grown, but how your growth has translated into benefits for your people. That's the point. How is it that after all these years of growth, child malnourishment is about 14 to 15% higher in this country than it is in the average across sub-Saharan Africa? You aware of that? Sub-Saharan Africa, the child malnourishment rate is between 30 and 35%. India's is 46% according to National Family Health Survey number 3. Are you guys familiar with terms like National Family Health Survey? NFHS is very good. You better be, because health is one of the fastest growing sources of debt for the Indian people. Yeah, it is. We are on the US model, where the highest number of bankruptcies in that country is around health. As our billionaires, by the way, in 2010, the United Nations introduced a new index replacing the earlier Human Development Index. Have you heard of it? It's called MDPI, multi-dimensional poverty index, going into other sectors beyond the HDI. Now the multi-dimensional poverty index, what is our rank? 122. Out of how many nations? 134. Then there is the Global Hunger Index, GHI, heard of it? International Food Policy Research Institute of Washington. Global Hunger looks at the performance of the 80 odd hungriest nations of the world. What's your rank down the slope? 67. But you know, we have made progress. As compared to 2006, we have beaten the pants of Zimbabwe. They were one step ahead of us. I mean, now they know their place. It's 68. So, then there is a Global Hunger Management Index, how you have managed your hunger. You know something? Ethiopia beats us on that. Progress indicator. It's called the Global Hunger Progress Indicator. Because at a time when hunger fell in Ethiopia, it grew in India. Let me tell you something more about your food grain. Have you noticed that they've announced a record food grain production this year? Have you noticed, by the way, that they've announced a record food grain production for every year in the last 10 years? Now this is, see, the Indian genius, as you know, especially sitting here in IIT, is for numbers. They're very good at that. Whenever we like, we go to the absolute numbers. Whenever we like, we go to percentages. Now, the great Indian food production miracle, 234 million tons estimated. Do you know that actually the per capita availability of food grain in 2008 was less than it was in 1958? Do you want me to explain that? How do you understand how a per capita food availability is devised or constructed? Would you like to know? Okay. Now, it's not as a lot of people think. Total food production divided by population. No, indeed, it's not. The food per capita available per Indian, at least notionally, is total food production, total output. Let's take some numbers. I can handle stuff which has round numbers and ends in zeros. Okay, so I'm sure there are guys in here who can handle the square root of 23 without a calculator, but I can't. So suppose your food production is 200 million tons. 10% is what the government declares is wastage, right? That is lost to pest and poor storage. That's a joke. But let's just accept the figure. I always accept Government of India figures. I don't have any other. You and I cannot run a separate census. I take the figure and I critique the figure. But I don't make up my own figures. You see, as the other day, the Humphrey Carpenter was trying to interview us on the books thing, and he said, you know, we wanted to talk to you, but you know, you're not into modern Indian fiction, are you? I was very offended, and I said, I will have you know that I am the world's leading authority on modern Indian fiction. I read more Government of India reports than anyone else. Anyway, the total food production, assume it's 200 million tons. 10% is gone for wastage according to the government. How much is that? 20 million tons gone from what's available. Then 12%, 10 to 12.5% goes in what the farmer retains for seed and feed. You understand that? Yeah, good. So the farmer retains 10 to 12.5% for seed and feed. So 22.5 million tons gone. That is 22.5 million tons plus 40. So 42.5 million tons gone. You're left with 157.5 million tons. Well, not bad. Okay. So then it includes you add imported grain. Let's say you imported 5 million tons of grain. You do through various processed foods, etc. And let's say you exported 5 million tons of grain. Cancelled. Okay. Then you add the food stocks, available food stocks. Let's say there are 2.5 million tons of grain that in the available public stocks. 160 million tons. Right? That divided by your population is the per capita availability on the whole. And then you translate it into daily by dividing it by 365. Clear? I don't think for a bunch of IITians this should be advanced math, right? So, That is your per capita availability. Translated into days. In 1991, at the start of the reforms, which have actually, as I said, constructed inequality in new ways and deepened it, your per capita availability of food grain, in which you include pulses and cereals. Do you want to know where you get this figure? You're going to get it in 3-4 days again. From where? Economic Survey of India, the document that is placed in Parliament just before the budget. It's table A17. I'm saving you the time. It's called net per capita availability of food grains, pulses, and food grains bracket pulses and cereals. So this 160 million tons. What has it been over the years? In 1991, it was 510 grams per Indian. In 2008, last figure available, for not provisional but final figure available, it was 432 grams. That's not a fall of 78 grams per Indian. It's a fall of 78 grams into 365 days into 1.2 billion people. That somewhere roughly should be between 25 and 35 million tons. So actually, your food grain production may have, when it's 200 million tons, they say record. It goes to 200.5 million tons, that's a new record. It goes to 203.2 million tons, that's a new record. So we are setting records every year, but the amount of grain is declining. Let's take 4-year averages, okay? Let's take 4-year averages. Let's take 2004 to 2008, the last 4 years for which we have data. The net per capita availability of food grain for those last 4 years is 436 grams. 436 grams. Let's take a comparable period of 4 years, 50 years ago, when the country had just been independent for 10 years, barely. 1955 to 1958. What was the 4-year annual average for those 4 years? 442 grams. In other words, your net per capita availability of food grain for 2005-08 is marginally less, which could work out to maybe 3-4 million tons, okay, by the way, in actual terms, in absolute terms, than it was in 1955 to 1958, which is 50 years ago. Something has gone seriously wrong with your food production. You have a massive rise in hunger amongst the most vulnerable sections of your society. Let me tell you, you can look at hunger in calories, or you can look at it in calorific values, or you can look at it in amount of grain. As a journalist, I'm compelled to look at it in ways that are just mind-boggling. Let's not go to deep interior Kalahandi. Let's go to Mumbai. Urban periphery Mumbai, last summer. I'm sitting with teachers from a municipal school who are pleading with me to use my influence. They somehow imagine that journalists have some. And it depends on what kind of journalism you're doing, really. They said, sir, please insist, write to the government, tell the government that the midday meal should be double ration on Monday. Now, I was foxed by that. I said, why should it be double ration on Monday? They said, because the child has starved for 3 days at home. The last meal that child ate was Friday at noon. That's hunger, guys. That's hunger. They said, no teacher is willing to teach a class before 1 p.m. on Monday because we can't control the children. They're starving. Their bellies are burning. We can't control those children. So please, sir, see that the Monday midday meal is double ration to calm those tormented bellies. Then I go to Telangana. In the villages of Nalagonda, for the first time in my life, I'm approached by, there is a double jeopardy for me. Not only am I a journalist assumed to have some influence, I'm also Telugu. So I'm approached by a delegation of mothers. Very, very, very honorable, very big honor, but what do they want? That time, you remember last year there was a heat wave in Andhra Pradesh and lots of people died. The government closed the schools several days early. They closed the school 10-15 days early all across the state because people were dying of the heat wave. What happened? The mothers were begging that the schools be reopened and kept open through the summer because the only meal they were able to get that child was the midday meal in the school. I said, listen, the kids will die of heat stroke. They said the kids are dying slowly instead of dying fast. They said, please, if you have any love for us, please go and ask the government to keep the schools open during the summer. Most of the mothers in most of the villages you go, if you put them this idea, they will jump at it. They want it because that's the one meal in the day that that child is eating. This was in village after village in Nalgonda and Mehboob Nagar. After that first delegation, I went and asked mother after mother. They said, this is what we pray for, that the schools should be open every day. Then the kid gets something to eat. Hunger, guys, is 70-year-olds showing up on the NREGS sites to break stone and dig because they can no longer afford food. 2 years ago, I did a story. Some of you who are from Andhra Pradesh may have seen it. I don't know whether I did him a favor or a terrible thing. I did a story on a guy called Gadasu Ramulu. He shocked me because he was working in the noonday sun in Nalgonda and his age, as we established, was 74. So I said, Gadasu Ramulu Garu, why are you doing this work? You haven't worked for 10 years. He said, my monthly old age pension is 200 rupees, sir. When tuvar dal, when kandi popu, as they say, what is it, here, red gram, is 100 rupees a kilogram, and my monthly pension is 200 rupees, what do I eat? The children in the house, they need to eat. So you see, when you get a hunger crisis, old people and widows are immediately marginalized in the house. So what was the other long queue at the NREGS sites all over Telangana and all over Rayalaseema? Elderly widows in their late 60s, because their homes have stopped giving them food, because they will only give food to those they consider the productive member who can go out and work. This is hunger. So there's a long line of widows standing there begging the officer at the NREGS site for work. The thing is, guys, are we human? Can we think about this and think about our own shame and connivance with a system and with policies that create this sort of torture on human beings and humiliation on human beings? Or is it just okay? I don't think it's okay. I do not think it's okay. Okay? I want to see outrage. Then, Gadasu Ramulu, fortunately or fortunately, after we did the story on him, he became a celebrity and was on every talk show, including Star TV. Now that is the modern equivalent of torture. So I don't know whether I did him a favor. But the government of Andhra Pradesh quickly announced 10,000 rupees for him. But how many thousands of Gadasu Ramalus are there across these villages? What about them? That's hunger. Hunger, guys, is all over Rajasthan, where Adivasi families at this moment, you know what, we create the NREGS program for malnourished, hungry people and then ask them to do work that they are not physically fit to do. We keep measurement of work that they cannot meet. So you know what the Adivasis of Kotada, Tehsil and Udaipur do? They rotate their hunger. They can't distribute food, so they distribute hunger. 2 of them eat well today. They go out and do the work. They come back next day. 2 other brothers go and do the work. Or brothers or sisters or whoever. Right? That's hunger. But in Kenpalli village of Anantapur district, fully 1/5 of all workers were above 60 years of age last year. Fully 1/5 of all workers at the NREGS were above 60 years. Several of them were above 65 years of age. Because the price rise has simply clobbered them. Right? You know what your price rise on rice and wheat is since 2004, 2005? You're talking about 140, 130, 120% increases in essential commodities. Right? And then the Prime Minister says, price rise is a matter of concern. Well, Mr. Sharad Pawar says, well, you know, the prices will go up a bit. It has nothing to do with scarcity. Your onions, I was in Lassalgaon market. 14 days ago, onions were 90 rupees a kilogram. Do you know what they were yesterday? 2 rupees a kilogram. Now, if it was due to scarcity, where did all those onions, did they just force themselves out of the ground in response to the misery of the Indian people? Pakistan banned export of onions to India, remember? So where did all these onions come? They were there. Speculation and hoarding. The prices of your essential commodities are very largely driven today by speculation in Dalal Street, by futures trading in agricultural commodities. That is what, just look at the volume increases in the last In the last 24 months, you look at the volume increases in the food price grade. But different people give different interpretations of the scarcity. In 2008, if you remember, even the West had a crisis over food prices. And that noted, well-known nutritionist, George W., declared that the problem was that Indians and Chinese were eating too much. Why are you laughing? Your agriculture minister said the same, interviewed by DNA in 2008. He said South Indians are eating many more chapatis. That's why wheat prices are going up. Okay, Montek Singh Ahluwalia agrees with this. He says it shows how much new purchasing power has come onto the market. That is the answer to that, right? So this is what is happening on the food front. Hunger is very intense and burning. The way it's worked and the way we get co-opted is that this reforms period has been phenomenally good for everybody sitting in this auditorium. Take me. I'm a very big beneficiary of the reforms that I rail at. In the 1980s, I was deputy chief editor of Asia's biggest tabloid outside Japan. I was the second big cheese, because the big cheese was the owner in Blitz Weekly and in the Daily. But as a freelancer in the 90s, I earned a hell of a lot more and ate at better restaurants than I could ever afford as deputy chief editor of the biggest tabloid group outside Japan, in Asia. Why? Because the policies that came benefited me, but at somebody else's cost. So you have this incredible paradox where tens of thousands of better off urban Indians go every day to gyms and weight loss clinics, right? While tens of millions of other Indians try desperately not to lose any more weight. Both are your nation. Both are your nation. Think about those who are trying desperately not to lose any more weight. Which sector do you want to look at the inequality in? Health? The latest NSS data on health shows us what? It shows us that 28% of this population are no longer reporting their ailments because they simply cannot think of affording the health costs that go with taking an ailment for treatment. They're unable to even think about that kind of a situation. Okay, so these are some of the areas in which inequality. In the same period, okay, let's take the latest 4 years. We are now in 2011. Let's take from 2007. From 2007, the government of India has appointed 3 committees. Which are those? On rural poverty. National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, headed by the distinguished and late Arjun Sen Gupta, who died in December. The second committee is the BPL expert group, of which I was a member for my sins. And the third group, with very distinguished co-sinners, I might add, like N.C. Saxena, who headed the commission. And the third group was, you see what governments do. Sometimes they will have 14 commissions of inquiry on the same issue until they get a report they want. We've had so many commissions of inquiry into the Vidarbha suicides. As one farmer told me, Kastakar, that is cultivator, Kastakar commission zyada. There are more commissions than there are cultivators now in Vidarbha. That's what he said. Now, what these 3 commissions were to look at whether the rural poverty figures were realistic and to do the BPL expert group, of which I was a member. By the way, the first annexure of the BPL expert group, the largest annexure, is the dissent note attached by yours truly. But what did these commissions show us? The first commission, which really is the best commission, I was not, alas, a member. National, and by the way, it's a government body that I worked on, except that I do not take honorariums and I do not accept posts and I do not accept privileges from government. The NCUS, on its first, please write it down. You can get it on the Rural Development Ministry's website. National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector. It's free download. Page 1, 836 million Indians. 836 million Indians live on less than 20 rupees a day expenditure. What do you get in 20 rupees? A bottle of Bisleri and a chai. Now, 53 billionaires, their net asset worth is equivalent to between 1/3 and 1/4 of your gross domestic product. In a population of 1.2 billion, 53 guys, sorry girls, they are guys, 53 guys have a wealth equivalent to between a third and a fourth of your GDP. It used to be a third, then the meltdown came and gave them a share. Okay? So it's down to about a fourth. 836 million Indians live on an expenditure, or daily expenditure of less than 20 rupees. Just look at the gulf. Believe me, if you think that this sort of inequality can be sustained, you've got to be joking. You have got to be joking. Don't think it will come out in nice, positive, democratic struggles. It will come out in the rise of fundamentalism. It will come out in the rise of extremism. It will come out in all sorts of nasty and highly unpleasant ways that you will find it very difficult to continue as an unfragmented society. You are already pretty fragmented. It just gets worse. The second commission, so they got very upset with Professor Arjun Sen Gupta, despite his World Bank, IMF credentials, etc. And they asked BP Saxena to chair the second commission. Our expert group, the climatic meeting which I attended, because I was out of the country for a while when they held the first two, was attended by 17 upper class, mostly upper caste males, who fiercely debated on whether women were really poor. Yeah? Yeah. That's actually what happened. We debated fiercely, not a single woman in the room. Yeah, but we decided. And at least we were an improvement on the earlier poverty BPL census, where you know how they measured female poverty. They went, whether the female-headed household was poor or not, they had a mark sheet indicator. Owners of boxes to be ticked. 1 sari only. 1 to 2 saris. 2 to 3 saris. 1 to 4 saris. Guys, what about if it's a household with 5 girls? That makes them rich. Well, in one sense it does, but it doesn't make them economically rich. I mean, this was the level at which these figures are computed. The third, then even our figure came to over 50% of the population. So they didn't like that report. They said, give me vanilla. So they went to a third commission. They went to Dr. Suresh Tendulkar. You heard of the Tendulkar committee? Tendulkar, after clicking his tongue at us, still gave a figure that was 12% higher than the government, 14% higher than the government of India's figure, 42% of rural poverty, as against the government stated position of 28%. So they're stuck. They don't know what to do. They'll have to get one more committee. Now, then there are the private committees, which have been around for a long time, since the late 90s. My favorite is the NCAER committee, which claimed to have done the biggest study on poverty ever, with over 33,000 households and stuff. We'll come back to it if we have time for a joke. Okay? By the way, who are these 836 million people who live on less than 20 rupees a day in a period when Indian CEO salaries have grown at a faster rate than anywhere in the world? I don't mean in terms of absolute salary, growth rate of the CEO salaries. My source for that is the Economic Times, as Economic Times are the best sources on wealth in this country. So that's something that I do follow. Right. So you have a food crisis, you have a policy, you have an inequality crisis. Inequality is the main thing. It's the canvas against which all of this happens. Come to the farm crisis, and that's our last section. And I mean, the media, much of what I've been telling you about is an implicit criticism of the media. You know, I know that when you come to talk about media, people immediately want you to talk about the Radia tapes. There are much bigger problems than the Radia tapes in the media. The Radia tapes show you who's running the country, damn it. And it's not the journalists. Journalists like to think they're running the country. But actually they come out very pathetically. If you made a film of the Radia tapes, you know, in the cast of characters, starting with lead actors, because there are no heroes, there are lead actors, major villains, the big baddies, supporting cast, comic relief, the journalists start at category 4. I read an article the other day by one of the country's most high-profile editors. You can't keep him off TV any day. And newspaper editors saying that poor Tata and Ambani were misled by this. You know what the words he used for Neera Radia? What was this? By this broker from hell. No, you know, the scene he painted was very touching. Poor innocent lambs, Mukesh Ambani and Ratan Tata, being misled by this deadly vamp, right out of a Hindi film of the 60s. Now, please understand, Neera Radia is a very skilled, by the way, in my opinion, after listening endlessly to those wretched tapes, she's the only person who seems to me to be interesting. Okay, and she was doing her job. Okay, the journalists were not doing their job. And if we say that it was she who was the power and Tata and Ambani were innocent victims, then let me ask you a question. Does she derive her power from her clients or the other way around? Suppose Neera Radia was able to influence high policy decisions. Would Neera Radia have had 10% of this influence if her clients were not Tata and Ambani, but Zandu Balm and Hanuman Agarbatti? You think she'd have that power? Don't kid yourselves. The tapes show you who's running the country. That's what they show you. That they're able to decide who will be minister, who will not be. Who will be minister and get which portfolio. They're able to decide that. Think about it. The farm crisis. From essentially, 8 processes have occurred all over the world. All over the world, 8 processes have occurred. Yeah, you can stretch them to 9, you can stretch them to 6, but broadly, the first. I call this McDonald's economics because it tastes the same everywhere. The first process is the withdrawal of the state from sectors that matter to poor people. The state has not withdrawn from the economy. If the state has withdrawn from the economy, there would not have been $8 trillion of stimulus after September 2008. The state has withdrawn from the poor. The rich have seceded from the nation. That's what's happened. Okay? Look, every year for 30 years, you follow, do you not see little items in the newspaper where some pathetic UN official says $15 billion additional expenditure and we can send every child to school? Don't you see those items now and then? $12 billion additional expenditure and we can send and we can give basic water supply and sanitation to everyone. You're familiar with these sort of stories. You know how much that adds up to? 60 to 80 billion dollars. Why has it never happened in the last 30 years? Because there's no money. 60 to 80 billion dollars, which would have addressed the basic problems of the human race, never were addressed because there's no money. But when Wall Street hits the fan, there's $1 trillion in 1 week. In 1 week, the governments that could not raise $60 billion additional expenditure raised $1.5 trillion. Over the next few months, they raised $8 trillion. And they wrote a stimulus package at the US Congress rewarding the guys who had brought the economy down. So it's not that there's no money. It's a question of who's got the claim on that money, who controls that money. That's inequality. Now, so that's the first process, the state withdrawing from sectors that matter to the poor. The second process, I'm going to raise here so that we stay on time and we can discuss. The second process is imposition of the massive cuts in subsidies and supports to people who need it most, to very poor people, in health services, in education, like what we've done in the public distribution system. When I joined the BPL group, the Planning Commission gave us a letter. Yes, make your independent estimate, but make sure it doesn't vary from ours by more than 20%. Because the aim was to bring down the entitlements of those who are poor and hungry. Right? That was the whole aim of our committee, which is why you have a dissent note from me. Which, by the way, the chairman of the committee basically endorsed that note also, but he was the chairman and had to go with the main report. Third is the process. There are 3 processes that are central. One is one of the most rapid transfers of wealth from poor to rich. Now those stimulus packages of $8 trillion all over the world, whose money was that? Public money. Who did it go to? It went to the banks and the big corporations that had brought down the economy. That's transfer of resources and wealth from poor to rich, which also happens every day in our policies. Okay? Like when you give entertainment tax waiver to IPL, you're giving public money to 4 guys who are on the Forbes list of billionaires. That's absolutely unconscionable, absolutely disgusting. I'm very glad to say that after we wrote about it, the Mumbai High Court has ordered that they will pay the taxes in full. Of course, they never will. They've got lawyers for that, who will delay the thing until it dies. 4th, the unparalleled and unprecedented rise of corporate power, like never before since after World War II. In the 1910s, and 20s, and 30s, you had corporate power on that scale that they do now. Look at the guys, they bring the world economy down, then they write the rescue plan, in which all of them get huge bailouts themselves personally as well, right? So that is their situation, right? The fifth is what I call the privatization of just about everything, including intellect and soul. 20 years ago, I used to wonder what this word means, public intellectual. Now I know, the rest have been privatized. They've all joined private think tanks at huge salaries. So those who haven't and haven't yet been sold, you call them public intellectuals. At least that's what I think is the understanding that I have to arrive at. The sixth such process is, well, the suborning of local governance and democracy by unelected people. That is, you look at today your new crop of IAS officers. Again, for 15 years I've been teaching on and off at the Mussoorie Academy. Wonderful material, highly idealistic. After 5 years in the service, everyone is trying to get a deputation to the World Bank or the IMF. That is the main aim in life for them. So you're right into the bowels of the bureaucracy, absolutely suborning. And then that guy has to attract attention by demolishing 500 slums to show that he's on the urban renewal mission, that he's a real missionary in the urban renewal mission. So there are these 7 or 8 processes. The stunning rise of inequality is one of them. And the last of them, you may say, is the complete dominance of what I call the ideology of market fundamentalism. Please note the hypocrisy of this ideology of market fundamentalism. When everything goes bust, then they don't want the market to play its role. Then they want governments to intervene and bail them out with $8 trillion. But it's market for the poor and socialism for the rich. That's what's happening. You've got socialism for the billionaires. So when they screw up the global economy, when they finish the global economy, then the state has to rescue them. Then they don't say, let the market take its course. The invisible hand of the market is actually a very identifiable bunch of grubby paws. I can tell you who owns them. It's not difficult in your economy at all. You can see it from the list of bank defaulters put up by the bank unions. When asked in Parliament to name the defaulters, when asked in bank, every finance minister has said that violates privacy and banking secrecy. But if you go to any village, the bank pins the defaulter notice to that guy's door. Okay? You go to any village, they'll pin it in the Panchayat Bhavan, they'll pin it on the guy's door, the note. There, he has no right to privacy or banking secrecy because he's not a billionaire. Right? This complete injustice and inequality that's grown in your population, believe me, you are asking for big time trouble. All these policies, how did they reflect in agriculture? They reflected in just one measure, in the farm suicides. Please understand that the farm suicides are not the agrarian crisis. They are not. I cover both. The farm suicides are not, they are the outcome of the agrarian crisis, not its origin. They are the consequence of the crisis, not its cause. And how many farmers have you lost? Between 95, from when we started keeping data, to an assumed average figure for 2010, you've lost 250,000 farmers in suicides. That is the largest recorded wave of suicides in human history. Whose numbers are these? National Crime Records Bureau. That's a Government of India body. Though when I first published the figures in Maharashtra, Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh, who was then Chief Minister, challenged the figures. He didn't know that they were all from his police stations. He thought that somebody was conducting a private survey in Delhi. So at the press conference, he asked, ye NCRB kya cheez hai? What is this NCRB? See, knowing Vilasrao for the last 20 years, he probably thought that the NCRB was the youth wing of the NCP. And therefore a rival organization. Please notice that he is the first Chief Minister in your country's history, the first Chief Minister in your country's history to be pulled up by the highest court of the land for protecting money lenders. Have you read about it? God, don't tell me you haven't read about it. Yeah. And what do they do to a guy who protects money lenders? They promote him to Minister of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. A guy who has been, when the High Court fined him 25,000 rupees for the same crime, He went to the Supreme Court hoping that they would strike it off. They did. They replaced it with a 10 lakh fine. Okay? And then 5 days after that, the Prime Minister makes him Rural Development Minister and Panchayati Raj. What sort of a message are you sending out? It's just amazing. You look at it, you know, the late L.C. Jain, his book is out recently in Chennai. L.C. Jain writes a very beautiful passage in his book about how government under the Congress from the 70s was run on the Bata Shoe Company model. A proprietor appoints dealers who appoint sub-dealers. In Maharashtra, the sub-dealer network has broken down. One chief minister was sacked for 2611 and then pulled up by the Supreme Court. The second chief minister went with Adarsh. One of the things I really love about this country is that all our scams have such beautiful names. Satyam, Adarsh, Commonwealth. You know? We know a good scam. Right? So, and by the way, there are much more larger ones around the corner that nobody wants to dig into, like Lavasa. And if you want to find out who that politician is in DB Realty, you will see shortly. Look at Lavasa, you'll know. Now, 250,000 farmers have committed suicide between 95 and 2010. Even if we take the clear figures, which are from 95 to 2009, sorry, 97 to 2009, it's 216,500. I say clear figures because the 95 and 96 figures are incomplete. Tamil Nadu reported 0 suicides at that time because it was a new system and all the machinery had not fallen into place. Now, if farm suicides were occurring at the same rate as the rest of the population, there's no issue. They are occurring at double the rate in the 5 states. 5 states account for 2/3 of our farmer suicides. Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh. In these 5 states, the rates at which farmers are killing themselves is more than double the rates at which non-farmers are killing themselves. So something is serious. And what do these 5 states have in common? High degree of cash crop and commercialized crop, high degree of chemical intensive agriculture, very high degree of chemical intensive agriculture, very high water stress thereby. These are some of the common factors amongst these 5 states, right? I began by telling you about the 2 latest households that I've been to. Except for Hargobind, Harane, all the other, and forgive me God, I visited 800 households where there have been suicides. You have no idea what it does to your brain and what it does to your mind and what it does to your health and what it does to your soul if you have one. Almost overwhelmingly are cash crop farmers, vanilla farmers and coffee and pepper farmers in Kerala, cotton farmers in Maharashtra, sugarcane farmers in Karnataka, rapeseed and mustard farmers in Madhya Pradesh and cotton farmers there as well. One of the great philosophies of the new economic policy since 91 was to shift millions of farmers from food crop to cash crop. That is why your food availability came down. Your food availability came down because millions of farmers were shifted from the security of food crop to the highly volatile risks of cash crop. Now, suppose you are in Kerala. Suppose you are. 8,000 rupees gets you an acre of paddy, meaning is your cultivation cost. But in 2003, when vanilla made its appearance, if you shifted to vanilla, it was 145,000 rupees per acre. 2004, incredible benefits. Vanilla selling, farmer was getting 4,000 to 4,500 rupees per kilogram of vanilla. That's almost $100 a kilogram. How much is he getting now? 68 rupees per kilogram. That's not a fluctuation, that's an annihilation. Okay? We nailed our farmers to the volatility of global prices, completely controlled by half a dozen corporations like Monsanto, Cargill, Archer Daniels, Midland, and the rest of the usual suspects. Those, by the way, are the most highly subsidized gangs in the world. You want to look at the subsidies of the EU and take cotton, where we have killed the largest number of people. The United States in 2006, its cotton value production, total production value was $3.9 billion. Its subsidy on the $3.9 billion cotton was $4.7 billion. Okay? The EU Each cow had a subsidy of roughly $2.75, which is double the amount, which is, by the way, more than what you pay in your NREGS flagship program for human beings. My friend Vijay Javandia, whom I met in Puducherry this morning, who is the leading agrarian intellectual of Western India, was accosted by one of these busybody young reporters from television who, you know, the one that shoves the mic up your nostril and asks you to make a comment, the deer in the headlights stuff. Javandia Saab, what is the dream of the Indian farmer? Javandia Saab says, the dream of the Indian farmer is to be born a European cow. Look, your countryside is in severe crisis at the very year that the media are writing about rural resurgence. What is their evidence of rural resurgence? Man, Aurangabad, 150 Mercedes-Benz. Okay, that's the evidence. 3 committees of the government of India are telling you that the lowest estimate of poverty is 14% higher. Suresh Tendulkar's thing is 14% higher. We've destroyed the farm sector. Millions of people have left the home, some of them never to return. Do you know how many people have quit agriculture between 91 and 2001? I'm not making it a point that nobody should quit agriculture. The point is, what options have you given them? Where have you absorbed them? In 1991 census, you had 111 point something million cultivators. 2001 census, you have 103 point something million cultivators. It means 8 million people quit agriculture in 10 years. In 2 months from now, you're going to get the 2011 census. You're going to know that your farm suicide figures are much worse, because the big difference between farm suicides and general suicides is that farm suicides are rising on a falling population. Right? So the intensity is far greater. General suicides, as the latest NCRB report shows us, between 1999 and 2009, all suicides in the population went up 15% in 10 years. But how much did the population go up? 18.5%. So in real terms, there's a marginal decline in the suicide rate in the country. But farm population fell and farm suicide rose. So one community is in a pressure cooker. They're not the only ones. There are many others we are not investigating, but they're the biggest. So what are we going to do about this? You can set up more commissions and more studies, like the NCAR did in its famous study at which I was present in 1997, where Dr. Rakesh Mohan presented the study of poverty, what he claimed was the biggest study ever in India in poverty, in 33,000 households with more than 300 parameters. We were very impressed. Up to that point, the journalists at seminar were doing what journalists do at all seminars, which was sleeping in a peaceful, non-confrontational manner. But when somebody says that they did interviews with 300 parameters, now I've been a journalist 30 years, I've never done an interview with 300 questions, okay? The guy next to me, who was still then snoring gently, dug me in the ribs and said, did he say they asked them 300 questions? I said, no, he said they asked them over 300 parameters. He said, God in heaven, I've been a journalist 35 years, the biggest interview I've ever done was 9 questions. That was with my boss's best friend, and my last question was, may I go now? So I put up my hand and I raised the question of the people who were presenting the report. I don't remember who exactly it was. I said, look, if you're going to ask your respondent 300 questions, your respondent is more likely to die of fatigue than poverty. Then he was very offended, and Dr. Mohan himself came on to explain, sir, it was a very scientific process. We had 2 investigators per household. That made a lot of sense. One investigator to hold down the respondent and twist his arm, while the other interrogates him with 300 questions, right? So you can go on in this nonsensical fashion forever, or you can start thinking about the inequality issues of which all these are a part. All these are a part of that. You can look at the National Commission of Farmers reports, which are online, which Mr. Pawar has not opened since they were given to him, even though those reports were chaired by Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who is an old friend of his, hasn't touched it. Not a thing. Not a word in those reports has seen the light of day. All of us contributed something to those reports. There are many, many solutions spoken of, but the larger issue, why you cannot solve the problems of education only in the education sector. Likewise, you cannot solve the problems of agriculture only within agriculture. It's that larger policy framework that is destroying people. It's coming out of those policies that are generating equality, entrenching equality, and celebrating inequality. That's also part of it. Okay. If also understand that there are some very positive things happening, and from the 2008 meltdown you can see one process of, because I said these processes were universal. The game is unraveling. If you thought that 2008 was the bubble collapse, man, there are 6 more bubbles in the queue. There's the credit card bubble. There are many other big bubbles down the line. The question is, if because we are comfortable with the benefits delivered to us by an extremely iniquitous and unjust process, we can go on being happy, and maybe we'll go through our lifetime being okay. I don't know. I can't guarantee it, because I don't think it's sustainable. You know, many years ago, I'll leave you with this, many years ago, when I was a student in JNU, and I read, and yeah, believe it or not, actually I read as a student, which was saying something in our times. I spent most of the late 70s, I love coming to university campuses and speaking because there's something of poetic justice about it. I spent most of the late 70s getting expelled from one campus or the other. So when they call me back to speak there, I feel, hey, this is nice, let me go. You know, I was trained in history, not in journalism. And in 78, I read a book which I asked my professor, who then was Romila Thapar. Actually, I raised the question with her 30 years or 35 years later. The book was by Tacitus, the Roman historian. Have you heard of him? Never mind if you haven't. Tacitus was a famous Roman historian. The others of his time were Suetonius and others, etc. But Tacitus was a very interesting historian. He had a degree of detachment. He hated Nero, who was emperor at the time, but he was detached enough to make a non-vituperative analysis of the emperor. In fact, Tacitus writes that unlike what people believe, Nero did not cause the fire in Rome. Nero actually tried to put out the fire desperately but failed, and lived in fear that people thought that he had started the fire, because the rumors were making the rounds all over Rome that Nero set the city on fire. Now, Nero needed to distract the masses because there were ugly whispers around Rome. So he held the greatest dinner party in ancient history. Now, anybody who was anybody was there at that party. The creme de la creme of ancient Rome, the philosophers, the saintly, the philosophers, the thinkers, the political scientists, the centurions, the generals, the victorious, warriors with their medals and everything else were there. They had a problem. Lighting. It's hard to have a good orgy in total darkness. So they had a problem. They solved the problem by bringing out criminal prisoners and setting them on fire. Okay? In Tacitus's beautiful prose, he says, the emperor offered his own gardens for the spectacle, where he had a 220-foot statue of himself, incidentally. And he says, they were burnt at stake, thereby to provide the nightly illumination. Now, a lot of people think of this as, it shows us what an insanely cruel person Nero was. By the way, Nero was pretty little league compared to what we have achieved in the 20th century and in the first decade of the 21st. Nero was pretty little league. And we call him insane, but we call as sane and just all those other Roman emperors who routinely fed thousands of human beings to the lions in the arena. They were sane. For me, the issue was never Nero. The issue was who were Nero's guests. The creme de la creme, the outspoken politicians, the journalists of the time, the historians, the philosophers, the political scientists, the generals, all of them were present and not one of them said a word. What kind of mindset did it require? To quaff another goblet of wine, to pop another fig in your mouth as another human being burnt at stake. In 2005, after 5 years of covering the agrarian crisis, I got my answer. I figured out who Nero's guests were. I had my answer. I think you have your answer. What kind of mindset does it require from us to watch another farm family turn belly up as the head of the household commit suicide? What kind of mindset does it require? For me, this question always was, who were Nero's guests? You know, one thing we can agree on, we may not agree on my analysis of what's happening, but we do know that a lot of things are wrong, okay? You will not maybe agree with what I have provided as solutions or will provide as solutions. I would provide first and foremost, I would ask each and every one of you to read the section in your constitution called Directive Principles of State Policy. That is the vision on which this nation was founded. Every one of them is violated by your economic policies today. These are not the fundamental rights. They come immediately after the fundamental rights, Directive Principles of State Policy. Will you read them? It's about 10 minutes of reading. It tells you why this country was founded, what it was meant to be. It was not just meant to be free from British imperialism. That was important, but it had a vision of a good society. And we can disagree over the principles, we can disagree over the route, but let's agree on one thing, that we will no longer be Nero's guests. Thank you.
Mr. Sainath would now be taking up questions from the audience.